The heat in Ouagadougou was brutal that day, but what pressed harder was the silence the cameras were on. The lights were blinding and the air was thick, not with humidity, but with history being made, the kind of moment that textbooks try to soften, the kind of moment that the West praise goes unnoticed, because if enough people saw what was about to happen, the balance of power might shift forever. At the center of it stood a young man no older than 34, his uniform crisp, his gaze deadly serious, his voice quiet but absolute. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, the man who had overthrown corruption in his sleep and then woke up to fight the world. He wasn't a politician, he was a soldier, a revolutionary, and most dangerously of all, he was honest, and the man he was about to confront wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. John William Cartwright was the director of African development at the World Bank. He wore a three-piece suit so sharp it could cut diamonds, and a smile that had charmed presidents in every capital, from Lagos to Kigali. He walked into the room as if it were already his briefcase full of more promises, his mouth ready with more numbers. But he didn't know that today he wouldn't leave with applause or agreement. Today he'd be lucky to leave with his dignity. Traoré didn't speak when Cartwright walked in. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't rise from his seat. He simply watched, and behind his eyes there was a storm. Cartwright took the microphone and began his usual sermon about partnership and sustainable growth and financial inclusion. But every word bounced off the silence in the room, because this wasn't an ordinary press conference. This wasn't about deals. This was about judgment. Then Traoré stood and the entire room went still. The reporters stopped breathing. The soldiers lining the walls shifted their boots ever so slightly, and Cartwright's smile faltered for just a second, because deep down in his banker's bones, he felt something was wrong. President Traoré stepped to the podium and placed a thick brown folder on it. He didn't open it. Not yet. He looked at the cameras and began to speak, not in the language of diplomacy, not with soft edges, but with words sharp enough to cut glass. We have come to the end of lies. That was all it took. The room froze. Cartwright blinked, but said nothing. For 60 years we have been told that you are helping us. We were told that the World Bank was our friend, our partner, our guide to development. But I ask the people watching around the world, where has your help brought us? He opened the folder. The first page was a map, old and tattered, but it told a story more powerful than any speech. This is Burkina Faso. In 1960, the year we gained independence, this map shows our land, our resources, our gold, our cotton, our people. We were poor but free then. Your system came, the aid, the loans, the consultants, the debt traps, and now we are poor and chained. Cartwright stepped forward, trying to interject, but Traoré raised his hand and silence returned. I will not be interrupted, not today, not when the truth has been silent for so long. He turned another page, revealing a chart with lines that spiraled like a snake. This is our debt curve from 1960 to 2024. Every peak you see, every sharp rise, corresponds to a loan agreement signed under pressure, backed by promises of growth that never came. What did come were conditions: privatize your water, open your markets, sell your gold for pennies, and always, always borrow more. Cartwright was sweating now. The cameras caught it. His jaw tightened, his grip on the table's edge visible. We exported billions in gold last year, yet our hospitals are collapsing. Our farmers can't afford fertilizer. Our students share torn textbooks. Why? Because every ounce of gold goes first to your companies, your banks, your contracts. He pulled out photos now, real photos, not graphs. They showed villages with no electricity, schools with holes in the roof, children walking miles barefoot to fetch dirty water, and beside them were glossy photos from World Bank brochures, smiling kids, shiny buildings, solar panels, and laptops. Which Africa are you talking about? Cartwright, the one on your flyers, or the one we are dying in every day? Cartwright finally spoke, his voice cracking. Mr. President, we have funded critical infrastructure across West Africa. You have funded control, not development. Traoré fired back, no hesitation, no fear. You gave us roads that lead to your mines, not our markets. You gave us electricity so your factories could run, not our schools. You gave us money with strings that became nooses. The audience gasped. Reporters scrambled to type every word. Soldiers stood straighter. Ministers looked at each other unsure if they were witnessing a speech or a revolution. This morning, I reviewed every agreement your bank has signed with our nation in the last 40 years, and not one, was negotiated from a position of equality. We were threatened with isolation, with economic collapse, with sanctions. You dressed it up with terms like fiscal responsibility and good governance, but we know what it was. It was extortion under the mask of development. Cartwright was pale now. He tried to respond, but his mouth wouldn't open. Today that ends. Traoré reached into his jacket and pulled out a single paper signed, stamped and final. This is a formal declaration that Burkina Faso is suspending all debt payments to the World Bank and its subsidiaries effective immediately. We will not pay 1 franc more until a full audit of every loan, every contract, every interest payment is conducted in the eyes of our people. And if that audit proves what we already know, that your system was designed to bleed us, not build us, we will demand restitution, not renegotiation. The room erupted, some in gasps, some in applause, some in stunned silence. Traoré wasn't done. To every African nation watching this, to every leader who has been forced to smile while signing your own people's future away, I say enough. We do not owe them. We owe our children, we owe our land. We owe our ancestors who bled for freedom and got debt instead. He turned to Cartwright now, not as a host to a guest, but as a prosecutor to the accused. You are not welcome here anymore. Your plane will leave tonight, your office will be shut down, and your documents will be seized for investigation. We are taking back what you stole, and if you resist, you will face our law, not yours, not the one written in Washington, but the one written in blood and soil by the people of Burkina Faso. Cartwright stumbled back as guards moved in, not violently, not loudly, just firmly, a reminder that even the most powerful banker in the world was still just a man in someone else's house. The cameras were still rolling, the world was still watching, and President Ibrahim Traoré stood still as iron behind him, the flag of Burkina Faso in front of him, the shattered remains of a lie that had lasted too long. The revolution wasn't coming. It had already arrived, and this was only the beginning. The world didn't sleep that night after the speech. Global headlines exploded like wildfire. Traoré's face was everywhere, from Al Jazeera to BBC to underground Pan-African forums. He wasn't just a president. Now he was a symbol, a rupture in the order, a voice that said what others only whispered in corridors and chat rooms. His words looped endlessly on television screens. Your system was designed to bleed us, not build us, and with each repetition, the old guards trembled and the young warriors lit up. But inside the walls of power, far from the cameras, smoke was rising. Smoke from cigars burned in anger. Smoke from phones overheating under diplomatic panic. Smoke from secret meetings happening in Brussels, Washington. Paris, the men in suits were not amused. Cartwright landed in Geneva the next morning, his face like broken porcelain. The usual arrogance stripped away, replaced with confusion and fear. No one had ever done that to him. Not in 40 years of orchestrating debt traps. Not in 30 countries across the global south. This wasn't just a setback. This was an open revolt, and he knew how these things worked. Revolutions sparked in one place had a nasty habit of spreading. Back in Burkina Faso, the mood was electric. Students danced in the streets. Women banged pots in celebration. Farmers stopped work to pray for the young president. They didn't fully understand global finance, but they understood dignity, and Traoré had restored something that had been stolen long before their time. But with every cheer came shadow. Agents began arriving in the capital under fake names, NGO workers, intelligence contractors, foreign journalists who asked too many questions. Something was brewing, and Traoré knew it too well. The real battle had just begun. In the war room of the presidential palace, he gathered his core team generals, ministers, economists, but also elders, griots, youth leaders. He didn't want policy, he wanted vision. And when he spoke, the room didn't breathe. They will not let this go quietly. We have touched the heart of the empire, the heart that feeds off our silence and our compliance. They will offer us money, threats, gifts, chaos, But we will not blink because this is not about debt. This is about destiny. General Koulibaly leaned forward, the scar on his face glowing under the dim light. We've intercepted chatter. French intelligence is active. They're coordinating with former regime loyalists, probably planning destabilization. Traoré nodded. Let them come. We will not strike first, but we will not fold either. If they want to understand the new Burkina, they can meet it face to face. Meanwhile, in Paris, emergency meetings were held behind gold-plated doors. Energy companies wanted guarantees. Mining corporations wanted updates. Diplomats demanded reassurances. Macron himself was briefed by his intelligence chief. If this spreads to Niger, Chad, Mali, Congo, we could lose strategic influence over the entire Sahel. He said nothing, just sipped his wine and stared into the map on the table. Africa used to be lines and resources to the west, but now it was becoming something else, something dangerous. The next day, Traoré received a phone call from the IMF, not official, just a personal call from a regional representative who used to be a friend. Her voice was warm. Her message was poison. Ibrahim, I want you to know there's still room to negotiate. The international community is concerned but willing to be flexible if you retract the suspension. Perhaps we can work out a new framework, something face-saving for both sides. He smiled and his voice turned to ice. Tell your bosses I'm not looking to save face. I'm looking to save my country, and if that scares them, it means we're on the right path. Then came the bombs, not literal, not yet, but the kind that drop silently, currency fluctuations engineered by external traders. Fake news spread through bot accounts, rumors of army betrayal, photoshopped images of Traoré meeting foreign arms dealers. It was psychological warfare. Classic playbook: destabilize, isolate, delegitimize. But Traoré had studied this. He had read Sankara's speeches, Lumumba's letters, Nkrumah's exile diaries. He knew what happened to those who dared to dream too loudly in Africa. But he also knew the game had changed this time. The people were online. This time, the youth were watching. This time, the silence would not be so easy to enforce. He went live that night, unfiltered, no script, no suits, just him in a plain shirt, seated under a flickering bulb, and the message was fire. They will try to paint me as a dictator. They will try to divide us with lies. They will say I have doomed our economy. But let me ask you this: what economy is worth saving? If it demands your slavery? What future is worth building? If it requires you to kneel? We were not born to borrow. We were born to build, and starting tonight, we will mint our own fate. Across West Africa, the signal echoed in villages and universities and army barracks, even in the diaspora in France. Belgium, Canada, activists wept. Elders prayed. Radical students began organizing teach-ins. Solidarity protests, calls for more African presidents to follow suit. But not all welcomed the fire. A coup plot was uncovered in Bobo Dioulasso. 3 colonels loyal to the old regime had stockpiled weapons they planned to strike during a national holiday parade. But Traoré's intelligence was steps ahead. The plot was crushed quietly. No blood, no press. But a message was left on the wall in red ink. We are no longer afraid. The World Bank's response came in press language, sterile and arrogant. We regret the statements made by the president of Burkina Faso and remain committed to working with all partners to support sustainable development in the region. But their actions said more. All funding to Burkina was frozen. Foreign assets hinted at seizure. Pressure was mounting. Yet instead of panic, Traoré called for a national conference, not in a 5-star hotel, but in an open-air stadium. 20,000 came: elders in traditional robes, youth with smartphones, imams, priests, engineers, miners. And when he took the mic, it felt like a continent was listening. I stand before you, not as a hero, but as a brother. We are at war, but this is not a war of guns. This is a war of memory, a war of truth, a war of futures stolen and rewritten. We will build our own institutions. We will create our own African bank, backed not by dollars, but by dignity, by gold, by cooperation across borders. They divided us with currencies, but we will unite with courage. Plans were set in motion: regional meetings with Mali and Guinea, and Niger. Whispers of a new Sahel alliance, independent of the CFA franc. Independent of Paris and Brussels, a new chapter was being drafted. But Traoré knew this was the most dangerous phase. Revolutions don't die in the streets. They die in boardrooms, in leaked phone calls, in assassinations dressed as accidents. So he doubled security, rotated his guards every 3 days, refused to eat food. He didn't see prepared, and most of all, he stayed close to the people, because as long as they believed the fire would keep burning, the next blow came from the United Nations. A resolution drafted behind closed doors called for international monitoring of human rights and democratic norms in Burkina Faso. It was a veiled threat, a diplomatic leash, but Traoré saw through it. He sent a letter back just one sentence long. You watched us suffer for decades in silence. Now you want to watch us heal in chains. We say no. It started with silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that comes before the storm. Just after midnight, a black SUV pulled into the service gate of the Ouagadougou presidential compound. Tinted windows, fake plates, 4 men inside. None of them spoke. One of them had once been on Traoré's security team. Another was a former mercenary trained in Europe. All of them had one goal: the revolution before it reached the tipping point. In Washington, a think tank meeting ran into overtime diplomats, analysts, corporate strategists. They reviewed intel on the Sahel situation. Traoré was no longer just a defiant voice. He was a threat to the global financial architecture if his actions triggered a cascade across Africa, if the CFA zone fractured, if African nations formed a united front against colonial-era debt mechanisms, then it wouldn't be just banks losing money. It would be the very idea of Western leverage collapsing. A quiet voice in the room broke the tension. What if we remove the symbol before it becomes a legend? Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré wasn't asleep. He hadn't slept in days. The letters from students, the death threats, the requests for interviews, the maps of sabotage attempts were stacked beside his desk. He stared at them, not in fear but in clarity. He had made his decision long ago. There was no retreat. There was no version of this story where he bowed out quietly. They would either take his life or he would take their power. The 4 assassins slipped into the building using a route designed years ago by French advisors. Traoré's office was at the top of the East Wing, but they didn't know that the layout had changed after he took office. They also didn't know that Koulibaly had discovered the plot 3 days earlier and replaced every guard in that wing with elite loyalists sworn to the death. When the first assassin opened the hallway door, he met silence, then a flash, then darkness. 3 shots, no words. The second assassin tried to run, but the elevator doors opened to reveal a soldier in full combat gear. His body dropped before his scream could finish. Only 2 reached the 3rd floor. By then, it was over. They were disarmed, surrounded, and unconscious in under a minute. Traoré stood in the hallway when they woke up, staring at them like a wall made of fire. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He simply turned and walked away. Because some men were not worth conversation, only justice. News of the attempted hit never made it to the press. Not because Traoré wanted to hide it, but because he wanted to announce it in his own voice at the biggest stage possible. 3 days later, he stood at the Pan-African Congress in Bamako, surrounded by leaders of Mali, Guinea, Niger, and Senegal. Thousands filled the stadium. Millions watched online, and when he took the mic, the roar lasted 5 full minutes. He waited until the last cheer faded, then began. They tried to kill me, not with words, not with lies, not with sanctions, but with bullets and shadows. They failed, not because I am lucky, but because we are no longer alone. The crowd erupted again, this time with defiance. For too long, we have been ruled by fear, fear of coups, fear of sanctions, fear of being isolated. But what they fear most is that we are not afraid anymore. He revealed the names of the hired assassins, their funders traced to shell companies based in Luxembourg, tied to mining conglomerates that had lost control of Burkina Faso goldfields. He named names, broadcast evidence, screenshots, voice memos, bank transfers. The empire wasn't in the shadows anymore. It was in full view, exposed. And now we respond not with violence, but with vision. He held up a document, the Charter of the Sahel Economic Sovereignty Alliance, a pact signed by 6 nations to withdraw from the CFA franc within 12 months, create a new gold-backed regional currency, establish the African People's Development Bank, headquartered in Ouagadougou, nationalize all strategic mineral resources, ban foreign military bases unless approved by citizen referendum, audit and challenge all external debts with an independent African tribunal. The crowd didn't cheer this time. They screamed, they cried, they held hands because they knew they were living in a moment their grandchildren would speak of. But the storm was not over. The World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and Paris Club released a joint statement within hours declaring that Burkina Faso and its allies had defaulted on obligations and would face full economic blockade. Access to international payment systems was cut, trade licenses, revoked assets, frozen foreign aid programs halted overnight. What they didn't expect was Traoré's response. He went on national radio, not TV, not live stream, just radio the old way, the people's way.